The Steam Deck has influenced Valve's hardware plans way more than anything else they've ever released. Everyone keeps talking about the new Steam machine, but after hearing Valve's latest interview, it's obvious that the Steam Deck, the way we use it, the way we dock it, the expectations we build around it, is actually shaping their entire hardware roadmap, including whatever eventually becomes the Steam Deck 2. This video is sponsored by Ugreen, and they sent over their new Nexalt 100 watts retractable charger, and honestly, it's a pretty great all-in-one. It's a compact GAN charger with 4 total ports, 2 USB-C, 1 USB-A, and a built-in retractable USB-C cable. And that cable alone makes this thing way more convenient than the usual brick. Build quality is absolutely excellent. It's a bit hefty, but it's very solid. And if you're in the US, the plug itself retracts, so the whole thing becomes super travel friendly. Performance wise, it hits up to 100 watts on a single USB-C port, and it can charge up to 4 devices at the same time with smart power distribution. I tested it with the Steam Deck and it delivers the full 45 watts that they can actually use, and I also tested it with a laptop and I was able to get to 100 watts. The built-in cable isn't super long, but it's definitely enough, and the retractable design keeps your bag clean and your desk tidy. No extra cable to wrap, forget or untangle. And because it's GAN Infinity Tech, it stays cooler and more efficient than older chargers, plus you get all the usual protections, over voltage, temperature monitoring, the whole package. If you want one charger that handles your Steam Deck, laptop, phone and everything else, this is a really solid pick. Check out the links at the top of the description, and thanks again to Ugreen for sponsoring this video. Today I want to have a chat about what Valve actually said and what it means for Steam Deck owners right now and what it could mean for the future. Welcome back to SteamFlow. On this channel I cover Steam Deck performance, SteamOS updates and everything happening around Valve's hardware ecosystem. If you guys find this useful or interesting, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification icon. It really does help the channel grow, and it will help you stay up to date with all these news. So a couple of Valve engineers recently gave an interview on the Steam Deck, Steam Machine and everything related to Steam hardware. One thing came through loud and clear. The Steam Deck didn't just succeed, it completely shifted how Valve thinks about hardware. After 2 years of real-world use, they now understand what players actually want out of SteamOS and handheld gaming. And we've seen this happen gradually with more deck-verified games, more deck-focused graphics presets, better battery tuning, and overall a much smoother user experience. If you've noticed, the latest SteamOS updates we've got, particularly this year, have to do with very small updates that have very big impact on the whole usability of the Steam Deck. But the detail that stuck with Valve is that a lot of people weren't just using the deck in handheld mode. They were docking it, they were grabbing controllers, and they were treating it like a lightweight living room PC. And Valve even mentioned how many people bought the official dock, not even counting all the third-party ones. And that's when they realized that players basically want the same deck experience on a TV that they get in their hands, and I think that's exactly where the Steam Machine comes from. It's not a product they built in isolation. The new Steam Machine isn't some revised idea from 2015 like everybody keeps saying. I think this time it exists because the Steam Deck created the perfect foundation for it. The Valve saw people docking their decks constantly, using them like consoles. They saw that they want more than 40 or 60 FPS performance on a bigger screen, and wanting the whole thing to just work without Windows overhead or BIOS tweaking or drivers downloading. The Steam Machine is basically what happens when you imagine the Steam Deck as a living room device instead of a handheld. It uses the same operating system, the same controller first philosophy, the same near instant sleep and wake functions, and the same clean UI, just with more thermal headroom, no battery limitations and overall better performance. But even with all that, Valve talks about the Steam Machine like a companion device. It's not the star of the show. That's why it's a mid-range PC, it's not a high-end one. It was never meant to replace consoles, it was never meant to grab that market share, to beat the PC or anything like that. It's more the Steam Deck is still the center of this hardware strategy, and the Steam Machine is just a really nice companion for it, kind of like a companion cube if you must. Now in this interview, Valve also talked about the Steam Machine pricing, and they're basically saying they're far away from the console model, they're not subsidizing it, they want the price to roughly match what it would cost you to build a similar PC from parts yourself. However, Keep in mind that they've also achieved a really small form factor, and they also talk about how they've achieved a pretty nice sounding quiet fan. So while you can still purchase all of the necessary parts to make something like yourself, you're never going to be able to reach that small of a form factor and that kind of optimization. So this probably means that it will cost even more than the sum of its parts. And I think that tells us something important. Hardware for Valve is still a long-term ecosystem play, not a short-term race to the bottom. They're not trying to outsmart the consoles, they're not trying to outsell the consoles, and honestly, I think the price conversation isn't nearly as important as what they said about the Steam Deck next in this interview. Everybody keeps focusing on the price, but let's forget about that for a second. Valve has been extremely consistent in their talks about the Steam Deck 2. They aren't interested in releasing a mid-refresh or something that's only a little faster. They want the next Steam Deck to deliver a real performance jump, but they also want to keep the same general battery expectations we have now. So for like 2 hours and 30 minutes for a big game, maybe 4 hours for a smaller game. They want to keep the same comfort, the same thermals, and the same low power operating range that makes the current model feel so balanced. In other words, they want a device that's significantly more capable without suddenly turning it into a 25 or 30 watt handheld like the competition is right now. Yeah, the ROG Ally X is super powerful, but it's also very power hungry. And if you look at the market right now, off-the-shelf chip really fits that description. Everything on the market that's meaningfully faster comes with a much higher power draw, which would make the Steam Deck heavier, hotter, and much worse on battery life. Valve doesn't want to sacrifice the identity of the Steam Deck just to match spec sheets, so they're not rushing it. They'll wait until the silicon exists that lets them build a handheld that feels like a natural Steam Deck 2 and not a compromise. And if that means 1 or 2 more years, that's perfectly fine with me. And this is where the Steam Machine actually helps. It lets Valve push SteamOS forward on a more powerful hardware without forcing the handheld to evolve before the tech is ready. So they're giving you the Steam Deck 2. It's just not going to be in a handheld form, it's going to be living room PC. And when you look at the bigger picture, the strategy becomes really clear. Steam Deck defines the baseline experience. SteamOS keeps improving both as a handheld OS and as a living room interface. And the Steam Machine steps in to provide more power for people who want it without replacing the Steam Deck. And once the right chip becomes available, Valve will build a true Steam Deck 2 that fits naturally into that ecosystem. It's gonna be a pretty slow process, but a pretty stable ladder. The deck in handheld form, the deck docked, and the Steam Machine in the living room, and eventually a next generation deck when the technology actually is ready to make it worthwhile. I think everything still revolves around the handheld device. And for deck owners, I think this is really good news. Valve isn't abandoning the device, they're not pushing out a rushed refresh, and they're not fragmenting the ecosystem. I think they're letting the Steam Deck set the standard and they're building everything else around it. So let me know in the comments, would you pair your Steam Deck with a Steam Machine? Are you more interested in waiting for a second generation handheld device? Would you prefer if Valve sticks with the same type of balance model, like 15 watts, maybe 20 watts, but the same form factor, same battery life? Or do you want something more powerful? That's gonna be it for this. I just kind of wanted to have this chat and pose some questions to you guys. So in that interview, Valve said a lot more things about the Steam Machine, about a potential Steam Machine Pro, how anti-cheat might work on SteamOS in the future, and even more stuff about the future of Steam Deck. So if you want to check out the whole interview, I'll link to it in the description below. But that's gonna be it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful. Please consider liking the video and subscribing for more Steam, SteamOS, and overall Steam hardware content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.